Welcome to Into the Fold, a Books and Lit Fest podcast with Jael and Lin. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Jael Richardson. I am the founder and executive director of the Festival of Literary Diversity, or FOLD.
I am your other host. I am Hudson Lin. I am the program coordinator at the FOLD.
So this is our 5th episode. I think. I'm starting to lose count. And we're talking today about the evolution of programming and through the pandemic and beyond. But I want to start with some news. So hoping by the time this podcast comes out that we have actually set up our Fold apparel shop. Assuming that we're successful. If you go to thefoldcanada.org, you'll see a shop button in the top right corner. And when you click on that, you're going to see a plethora of clothing options.
So many options.
Clothing. There's a denim tote bag that I am obsessed with. You might be able to see it in the shots here. I'm not sure, but it's here and I love it. I don't go anywhere without it anymore.
And if you're listening to this podcast on audio only, you need to go to the Fold's YouTube channel so that you can see
our gear.
All of this in
We're
person.
Actually wearing, so one of the lines we have is the read line. And so it's a number of different styles of clothing with the word read on the left chest?
Right
chest.
Your right chest.
Whatever. It's on one part of my body. It says read, and we have it in, hats. There's like a denim hat. There's crop sweatshirts. There's hoodies. There's crew necks. All of that. Lynn is wearing a gray, what we call our Fold varsity line, which is Fold. It looks like a varsity sweatshirt that you'd wear at a university. And so we have that on a number of different types and styles too. Sweatshirts, tank tops. If you're ready for summer or summer vacation. So all kinds of things, and all the proceeds, it's on demand. So we don't have to carry all the merch, but all the proceeds go back to the Fold. So you can wear cool gear, you can carry cool totes, mugs, all kinds of things, and support the Fold.
Amazing.
And if for some reason when you're listening to this or watching this, it's not there, something happened. And check our social media and we'll explain why. But I'm pretty sure we've tested it out and we're getting ready to release it soon. So that's a little bit of a commercial to start us off.
Commercial break.
Yep.
But now we're back and we're talking about the pandemic and how that's changed a lot of things for everyone.
Yeah.
But in terms of literary festivals, we had to do this huge shift when the pandemic happened from in person to virtual.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the drama during that time and what happened and how did you guys do that shift?
Yeah. It's funny because even in talking about the clothing and merchandise, part of what happened during that time is we had typically sold merchandise like the Fold varsity sweater in person. And we had bought all this merch and we had to figure out a whole shopping mechanism to deliver it to people. And so we got a Shopify account and we started delivering merchandise through the mail. And that's even what we're doing now in terms of selling merch is an evolution of that. But what happened? So I remember March 2020, we found out that there was a pandemic. And when you found out there was a pandemic, you knew things were shutting down for 2 to 4 weeks, I think was the initial, maybe 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And they would say at that time when it first happened, they were 6 weeks at the longest. So 6 weeks from mid-March is the end of April.
Yeah.
Right. So the pandemic, the original 6-week pandemic would have ended right before Fold. And so we knew there's no way, even if this number is correct and this timeline is correct, people are going to feel comfortable coming out to a literary festival as soon as it's cleared. So we just said, okay, no matter if it's 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10, turned out to be almost 2 years, we are going to turn this virtual. We're going to, and there was a couple reasons we did it. One, we had funding. We had received all this funding to put on a festival, and we wanted to put on the festival. We also knew that all the authors were going to be losing work. And so we were like, well, let's just do something so that we can have the festival pay the authors. We had already been doing Fold Academy workshops. We do workshops throughout the year to teach people about publishing, about writing. Those YouTube videos are up right now. You can watch this season's. They're usually up for an entire year. And so we had been doing those on Zoom already. So I like to say we were a little bit ahead of the game. We were already doing Zoom events, but we had done them on a very small scale. So we had to turn our, I want to say we probably had 25 in-person events into what became 16 virtual events on Zoom. And that was a lot. It was myself and Amanda at the time. That's it. It was just the two of us.
Wow.
And so, as you can imagine, it's the beginning. So some people had not been on Zoom and had not used Zoom. So there was a lot of teaching the authors how to set up their screens and a lot of things that we take for granted now. But we had to do a lot of figuring out, letting publishers know, and just transitioning it into a virtual festival. And it went really well. We had over 4,000 people from around the world attend. There was nothing else going on at the time. Literally, NHL, done. NFL, our NBA, all of it had just canceled, closed down. There was no new television being made. So for a lot of people, it was like, oh, well, I guess I'll watch this. And it went really well.
That's amazing. I think that's one of the silver linings that has come out of the pandemic. And I say this all the time, is that now there is such a robust virtual Zoom and virtual programming or ability to participate in things virtually. And I think two main reasons, two of the main benefits that I see is, one, you can participate from anywhere in the world. And so in other organizations I've worked with, we were able to bring authors to a virtual conference from as far away as the Philippines. And we would never have been able to fly that author all the way to Toronto to participate in this conference. But she was doing her workshop in the middle of the night, but she was there. And the other benefit is accessibility, because not everyone can physically attend events. And there are ways that we can accommodate for disabilities virtually that are much more difficult to do in person. And so from an accessibility standpoint, it opens up a lot of access to all different kinds of folks.
It's so interesting. I am such a big proponent of virtual events because of that. It just changed the game for us forever. We never, when we started planning Fold, thought it was going to be virtual. So when we did it, it was like, what? How do we do this? Can festivals be run this way? It's very interesting to me now to hear people. There's two arguments to the virtual. On one hand, it's expensive, right? It's expensive to deliver in-person and virtual events. It's especially expensive to try and do them simultaneously, which we generally try to avoid. When we're doing virtual events, we try and build it so everybody is virtual. The staff are virtual, the authors are virtual, everybody who's attending is virtual, because I think there's a sort of real sense of balance when that happens. We're all kind of operating from the places that are our home or our home for right now. So I think that's a big piece of the virtual events. That's an important experience for us. I think I think that's all I was going to say. Maybe.
So now that the pandemic is over, a lot of festivals have gone back to only in-person programming, but we've made the conscious decision to maintain virtual as well as in-person. And can you talk a bit more about why we're so dedicated to that?
Yeah, I mean,
I do.
I do know. I think it is. So the other thing I was going to say that I realized when we did the festival virtually for the first time, how many people had wanted to be a part of the Fold before and weren't able to do it because of geography. Having a literary festival that's geographically based is a very specific tourism experience. And if you can travel there and be there, that's great. It's an adventure. It's all the good things. But I think for Fold, we're also trying to do some industry changing work, making sure people are aware of things, making sure people discover certain authors and think about certain topics. And so there's also, for me, a bit of a professional development aspect to the Fold in which you want everybody to be able to do it, not just the people who can physically make it to your area. And I think that once we saw the impact it was having on people who may never be able to be here in person, it really became a mission for me to try and sustain it. And you also realize if you have a theater that seats, in our case, our theater seats 800 people. And while we're not filling it up at this moment, at some point when we're filling it up pretty regularly, what do? You really want more than 800 people to hear what a particular author has to say about a crisis around the world or about the sex scene they're writing or whatever. You want more people to learn and be available to the content. And so that's really why I believe in it. I think obviously there's accessibility reasons as well. I want people who like can't physically be here to be here. But I also just think there are people for whom it might not be a disability, but it's something like I just had a baby, or I'm traveling this year, or, my kid's graduation,
Or I just can't take time off work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or I want to show it in my classroom. I saw that author talk and now I want to share it with somebody again. Virtual just opens up a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities. And I think if we can wrap our heads around that and really build for it, it puts us in a better position.
Mm. I have also done lots of virtual events
Yeah.
versus in-person events. And one of the things as an author I appreciate about virtual events is that it's very easy to fit it into all the other things I'm doing with my life, right? I need to carve out maybe 2 hours of my day and sit in front of the computer, do the thing, then I can go back to whatever else I'm doing.
Yeah.
Whereas with in-person events, you really have to plan out maybe a half a day, maybe a whole day, maybe longer to go and do this thing, which is exciting. I love in-person events. There's this type of energy that you get from being around other people, being around other authors, and being with readers. That's very exciting. But it can also be very draining. It just takes so much energy and so much presence to be there. Whereas with virtual, it's quick. You get in, you get out, and it's done, and you move on. And you can do a bunch of virtual events compared to one in-person event.
Yeah, and I mean, you did FOLD the first time as an author virtually.
Yeah.
You attended in person, and then you were an author during the pandemic years. And yeah, I did when Gutter Child came out. It was like peak pandemic. It was the beginning of 2021 when it was like, for the next year, you will not be leaving your house, essentially. And so my entire book tour was virtual, and it was exhausting. Like, I was doing a virtual event almost every day, which is a blessing, I understand, but it was a lot. But I also got to do so many more events than I know when my next book comes out. There's going to be a handful of events that I get invited to, and some authors will get invited to none. And I think we will look back on the pandemic years as like abundant in a way we didn't appreciate as authors, where a lot of us got to do more events than we may typically have been able to do because everybody was virtual and everything was expected to be virtual, and everybody valued that being virtual meant we could do something we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And I think book events were one of the few arts-based events that actually translated pretty well into virtual. Like, if you go to a concert and then you watch a concert virtually, I don't know. Not the same thing. But I think hearing an author read virtually and in person, there's a lot of similarities. A lot of the content is being received in a similar way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the differences between virtual and in-person programming. And at the Fold, again, we do both. And when we're making programming decisions, we have to decide, okay, is this topic better suited to virtual, or is it better suited to in-person? And how do we make that determination?
Yeah, this is something I've been spending a lot of time on since the pandemic, because it's about curation and how to curate to the best of your ability. I won't spoil our guest, but our guest, I think, has some unique insights as well. But what I will say from the adult side in particular is really recognizing what makes an in-person event in person and necessary to be in person, and what makes a virtual event what you get with a virtual event that you can't get in person is really important. So for me, I look at virtual events as something like everybody's going to have access to, and everybody's going to have access to the content in the same way. So I like big conversations, like important. We did one on activism last year. Like, you want everybody to be able to hear that, and you want the authors to be able to participate no matter where they are in the world. So that was a great virtual opening event, because it's like, anybody can watch it live or on demand. You can get the authors from wherever they are in the world. There's almost no limitations to someone being able to participate virtually. And you get this really important chat happening. And it's about dialogue, right? It's about conversation. It's about witnessing. With in-person, I always like to think about in-person plus. almost all of our in-person events add a plus to it, some sort of bonus experience. So, for example, we do a paint and poetry night where a poet reads from their work, and a artwork is based on their poetry, and then the participants not only get to listen to poetry, they get to create their own art. We do a literary cabaret, which is an event I stole from Vancouver Writers Festival. Thank you, Vancouver Writers Festival. But it's, live readings to jazz music, a live jazz band. We do a high tea that's about romance writing, and we do a film, like a book that's been turned into a film. We do a couple of sort of more traditional panels, but they're usually designed around like, what time are people arriving? What time are people going to eat? How can these two panels work together to create a particular experience, rather than what we could do, what a lot of festivals do is we actually have space to do 3 panels. But instead of doing 3, we do 2, and we make this break so that people can actually like linger, meet the authors, hang out, have lunch together. Because I think every, for most marginalized communities, most communities, BIPOC communities, food is a really important part of like any experience. So I love to build events around food, thinking about when people eat, feeding them as part of the event, making sure they have time to eat and gather, and thinking about where they might gather to eat. These are all things that are an important part of building the festival for me for in-person. That's what makes in-person experiences special.
I love that idea of creating an experience. You're not just going and sitting in a chair and listening to people talk at you, but there is a participatory element to it. Either you are, actually painting something, or you are talking to other readers, or sometimes interacting with authors in a very casual environment that you would not be able to get elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that experience element is huge.
I was going to share something, but I'm going to save it for later.
Okay.
I'm going to save it for later because it involves our guest, which is it time?
I think it's time.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Okay. Let's bring
in
our guest.
I love when it works out that way.
Let's bring in our guest.
Bring in the guest. All right, we are ready for the second part of this episode of Into the Fold, a book and Lit Fest podcast with Jael and Lin. And today our guest is one of my favorite people, Ardo Omer. Ardo is our kids program coordinator who has tons of experience in programming, both virtual and in person. And the reason I think it's really cool that you're coming in now, based on what we were talking about before, is you came during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Like you started right after the first virtual festival working on Fold. So your first 2 Fold kids were virtual.
I think they were all like everything was virtual. I don't even think we had in person. Yeah.
Yeah. So your first couple ones were all virtual. So anyways, I just thought that was a cool base. We were talking before about just that transition into virtual events and what we gained and learned. So.
Yeah. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about pros and cons of virtual versus in programming, specifically for kidlit authors and kid-aged audiences.
I think the first thing that I think, especially for kidlit authors, that they're worried about is like energy. So authors in general, even for adult, like the concern for virtual is like, oh, I'm not going to be able to like gauge people's reactions, feed off their energy, pivot, all of that. And I can see why that's more the case with kids and being able to interact with them. So I can see why in person is really great for that, being able to be up and close with the kids, feeding off their energy, seeing where their energy kind of dips and being able to adjust for that. I do think programming for kids is really hard compared to adults. Adults are so easy. You put them in front of a stage, they'll sit quietly for an hour, they'll ask their questions, bada bing, bada boom. Kids need dynamic programming. They need to be engaged. And so I think our goal or approach to virtual programming was like, how do we do that? How do we make programming interesting? We can't have them, because there's so little interaction between the audience and the authors, how do we make the author's content interesting enough for them to be gripped? And part of that also was timing. Like we weren't doing 1-hour events. Especially the younger kids can't sit for an entire hour. So teens would get 45 minutes. And then anyone under the age of like, grade 4s, under grade 4s would get like 30 minutes of content. And we thought that worked really well. You'd have like story times. So authors would like, read from their books and then do an activity. That was the other thing too. We wanted kids to be able to do things during their events. Teens were a little more like similar to adults in terms of, having them listen to an author for 45 minutes, but we made sure to pepper in questions like, how did you become a writer? Those kinds of things to get them thinking about their own place in the world as writers or future writers. But yeah, I think programming virtual is also yeah,
because you just said a lot of stuff in there.
Mm-hmm. I said a lot.
You just dropped a lot of knowledge all in one like answer. I wanted to pick on one of the first things you talked about was energy, and that being like a really interesting thing. I've had a few authors of late say they don't want to do virtual events anymore because they don't like the energy of virtual, which is different. I think it still requires energy. But where they need that sort of like physical energy. And that's one thing to think about and consider and how you foster that. I think, as a kidlit author, I don't actually like writing kidlit because I don't like the kind of in-person energy that's required to really promote it. Like I think of somebody like Nadia Hone who has like costumes and puppets and, she comes into an event like ready to roll. And that's the way you need to be, I think, to be a kidlit author. Like if you really want to write children's lit, that is the kind of model that you need to follow. And we try and like help authors do that at FOLD Kidlit events. But I think when on the flip side, when you're going to virtual, there are ways to do that as well. And I think we've been really trying hard to teach authors how to maximize a virtual experience. There are things you can do that you can only do virtually. And I think people forget that. We often lean into like what we can't do. I remember the first time we did, we started getting authors to show their offices. So like when they're doing a virtual event, instead of just sitting in a space, be like, this is my office. This is where I put my pencils and this is how I paint or this is where I write my stories or, that kind of thing. You can't show someone in person what your office space looks like. And those kinds of like, when you figure those things out, they can really help add value to a virtual experience.
Yeah. And I think also virtual is like, where are people watching this content? Virtual is very affordable for schools, right? There's a lot that goes into taking your students on a field trip, right? Or bringing an author in. Like some school boards, there's so many rules as to how to bring an author in. You need insurance, you need a police check, you need all these other things, which are, valid and important for safety and other things. Whereas a virtual event, a teacher can preview the event, see if it's appropriate, and then bring their kids and then show it in the classroom. And also like busing. It's just a whole organization for the in-person.
I'm going to put you on the spot with this one because I forget the name of everything. You know this. I forget authors' names. I forgot book titles' names. Remember the bats, rats?
Yes, Salida's book.
Tell people about, share about that event. That was an event that I thought, that one, also the David Suzuki story time that we did, really unique ways that we used virtual events in a way that you can't get in person.
Yes. Salida Guy, I believe was her name, wrote this really cool nonfiction book about urban like animals in your cities and, communing with nature, even if you're in an urban space. And so what we did was, I believe it was her brother who was like a videographer, but we thought, oh, I know what it was. In the US during the pandemic, there was a teacher who took his students on a virtual tour of the zoo. So basically, it was a virtual class and he himself physically was at the zoo. And so he was showing the kids like, oh my God, here's the otters and all that. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And then when we saw Salida's book, I was like, oh my God, this would be great. Because we were still relatively coming out of quarantine during the pandemic. So I thought, oh, it would be so cool if we got her to record herself like in a park or somewhere. And in the end, she recorded herself with the help of her brother, I believe, in Scarborough, somewhere in Scarborough, and like was walking around a nature trail. I think it was the Bluffs. And so it was really great to see that part was pre-recorded and produced, and that was shown during the live event. And then afterwards, Salida joined us for like a live Q&A. And I thought that was like a really fun execution of an event.
And then David Suzuki did a similar thing where he was like, his book was about insects and he was like in his backyard and those kinds of things. Like, I think it's a shame I'm going to be a big proponent of virtual events until nobody wants to listen to me anymore. Because I just think it's not a matter of whether they're worthwhile or not. It's finding how to add value to them and how to make them better. You know, you cannot tell me as a teacher that that's not a valuable experience to be able to have a specific author talk to your class and answer their questions. I remember in high school, elementary school, you know, you'd roll out those like old VCRs,
The giant TVs.
giant TVs, and show these old videos that were not very impressive, but covered some very particular bit of information. And I think about, you know, Ardo curated the event for Remembrance Day last year around a book and the author taught the kids how to make roti shells. You know, it's like you can do things in a virtual event that you can't do in person. And I think the key is to make sure that experience is unique and to make sure, you know, even the interactions are unique. So for Big Fold in particular, like we have after parties, after panels. One of the things I think people like a lot about in person is like personal connections. Like I can touch you, I can hug you, I can, you know, see your face in person. And that talking afterwards, like I can break down the event with you and be like, wow, that comment was so powerful. And so we created after parties to create that sort of like, I love hanging out in the lobby after an event vibe where you can hop into a little Zoom chat with the authors and just sort of informally chat about the session. So we've been trying to build in experiences in the virtual landscape that improve the connections. Because for me, like I said, I'm not running away from virtual anytime soon.
And there's one particular event at Fold Kids Book Fest that is annual highlight. It's called the Illustrator Battle.
Yep.
And again, that's one of those events where it would be very difficult to do in person, but works super, super well in virtual. So can you tell us about how that one works?
Yeah, so the Illustrator Battle essentially is we'll invite 3 illustrators to essentially participate in a game show. The conceit is
and Ardo hosts the game show.
So I host it, and like the initial iteration was me figuring out what it looked like on the technical side, because it's a very technical event. You'll have the authors with like the video, face videos, and then their art videos. And the idea is that there's 3 rounds. There's a doodle round, a color round, and a technical round. And the idea is to showcase illustrations, like the various things you can do to create art, and like there's different levels to it. And the kids love it. They love the interaction. Yeah. At one point they could vote, and then they couldn't vote because we didn't have the capability, and it went back to them voting again for their favorite illustrator. And then, you know, whoever won each vote would get like an advantage into the next round. And then the disadvantages always involved me just talking and distracting the illustrators. But
so we have the illustrators on their own cameras, right? Like you would typically have for a virtual event. But then we also have cameras that cover like what their art is, what they're working on. So all the kids throughout the show, and we have a production. So sometimes you can see all of them. Sometimes you can see all their faces. Sometimes you can see all the artwork. Sometimes you see a mixture. But you can see the progression of their art in these like very timed like activities.
Very timed
activities in which Ardo judges ruthlessly. And so that's been a really fun one to watch, just like continue to grow in popularity. And I also, one of the things that I've taken away from the Illustrator Battle that I try and tell any parent with a kid that comes up to me and is like, my kid wants to be an illustrator. And I tell them all the time, your illustrations do not have to be perfect. They just have to be yours. And that's what you see. You'll see these incredible illustrators put together art and characters, and their characters have like funky hands, and they only have 3 fingers, or they only have like their heads are shaped like whatever. And you see through the Illustrator Battle that it's like they've just grown in the confidence of their own work. And that I think is really cool for kids to see, because I think so often when you're that age, you're trying to draw like the perfect face and the perfect hand and perfect feet. And they're just like, I'm going to make little circles where the feet are, you know, and I'm going to fill that in later.
I think that's why the doodle round's my favorite. These are very talented Canadian illustrators. And, you know, the other rounds, you get to see them at their best. But the doodle round is great because it's the one thing they don't know is coming. Like prep them. We'll do multiple tech runs to make sure everything works. But it's the one round where they actually don't know what to expect in terms of, we normally pick a pop culture character.
Yeah.
And I ask them all, like, what are your pop culture references? And then where the overlap is where I'll pick a character from it. And so I think the most recent one was Pikachu from Pokemon, and just seeing the fear in their eyes,
It was
because
great.
they have to recall what Pikachu looks like from
and
memory.
then draw from scratch and then like make it up, you know? It's
And
good.
some of their artwork, some of their versions of Pikachu is so hilarious.
Yeah.
And it's
Baby
very
Yoda
relatable.
1 year too.
Baby Yoda was 1 year. There was a Sailor Moon round. Yeah. But yeah, I think the kids really enjoyed that round in particular.
It's a good one. It's a good one. It's a
And we
highlight.
have Marty. That's the thing I want to mention. It was I think the first 2 years was very stressful. We actually debuted the Illustrator Battle at the Adult Festival before it permanently stayed at the kids one. And I was doing a lot of it was the combination of me, Jael, and Amanda just texting each other, or like, okay, do this next, all on Zoom. And so it was really great having Marty Chan, who's a kidlit author himself, and really great with Ecamm, come on as our producer. And he takes care of all of that. And so the reason why it looks amazing the last, 2-3 years is because of him.
So Ecamm is like a particular way that you can produce your work. And it's a way of kind of taking the control of the cameras and the different lenses. You know, Zoom typically only offers you like one angle. And it's about giving yourself, you want to have the cover of your book. You want to have your author photo. You want to bring those things in whenever you like to kind of vary the view. Ecamm is a system that you can build that really helps you do that. And when I came out with, I think Because You Are, I was trying to use Ecamm. I was trying to learn it because Marty used it. And then I was like, no, I'm gonna lean on my strengths. I'm gonna trust other people. So I think it's really exciting because I love watching. Marty is another person. Like I gave the example of Nadia Hone, especially for in-person events. If I was to lean into who to give another example, especially for virtual, it's Marty. And of course, Marty's top level. He comes from a production background. He figured out Ecamm. He uses it really well. But I think, I'm curious what kind of advice you have for authors who are doing virtual events, but certainly looking to models like that and figuring out how to make it work is where I go.
I think with virtual events, it's similar to in-person events, right? In the sense of whatever you do, first talk about yourself. I think authors forget to explain themselves to kids. Kids are interested in who you are.
Yeah.
They want to know, oh, you're a writer? What does that mean? What does it look like? How'd you get into it? The questions are the same for every event, every year.
Yep.
How did you get into writing? How did you get into illustration? How could I do that?
How many books do you have and which one's your favorite?
Exactly. Do you draw the pictures and write the words? All of those very basic questions are things they're interested in. So I always recommend the authors that I talk to. And that's the thing about us. We collaborate more so on the kids side. We collaborate with the authors. They are as much as a part of programming as we are in terms of, oh, you have this idea for this event that I didn't think of. Amazing. Let's do that. But
I think that's a you thing too. We recognized early on that a lot of kidlit authors, especially in Canada, do not know how to present their books to kids. Yeah. I don't mean to be harsh. I'm also speaking from my own experience of writing books. You put the book together, you think it's awesome, and you think I'll just go out there and read it. Well, no, you're going to get asked to do, whether it's in person or virtual, half hour to 45 minutes to an hour long presentation on your book. You're going to be asked for ideas, get some ideas together. So Ardo's been really good at, she books her authors for FOLD Kids and then makes one-on-one meetings with each of them. And we're even going deeper this year to try and build lesson plans where it's even more clear, break it down 5 minutes by 5 minutes, because once you have that, you can duplicate it, add to it, make it better. But if you don't have that, you will go into virtual or in-person events and just feel like you're floundering and you're just putting random stuff together.
Yeah. I think it's important to, whatever it is you do, it's something that's engaging. Don't rely too much on PowerPoint.
Yes.
I think people want to rely on PowerPoint for a virtual event. Bring up PowerPoint for things if it's a workshop and you're giving them a prompt and you're giving them a few minutes to work on the prompt, then maybe leave that PowerPoint with the instructions up so that people can refer back to it. But as little as possible, use PowerPoint. Like, you want your face to be the thing that people look at.
Well, and I think kids are honestly more interested in what's behind you than they are in the PowerPoint. Like, if you have a room and you have like random posters, David Alexander Robertson usually has like his like figurines that he collects behind him, and kids love it. They're like, who is that? Where did you get that? How long? They want to know more about your life. So PowerPoints are like, I think, a bit of a mood killer actually with kids events. Like, they should only be brought up if you're doing like an instruction or you're spelling a word, you're showing them a place, like really strategically. They would rather see your face and hear you talk than to look at points on a PowerPoint screen.
Yeah, feel comfortable sharing screen and stop sharing screen when necessary. Not
mix
have
it
all
up.
the way
Don't
up.
leave it up, especially because unless you figured out the new features in Zoom, you're typically then sacrificing your face being very small and your PowerPoint being very large. And that's like, kids do not care about looking at PowerPoint, especially the younger you go. If you're middle grade and below, like PowerPoints should be at a minimum and only as needed.
I think that applies to adults as well. Because especially if the stuff on the PowerPoint if there's minimal information on the PowerPoint and you're doing a long spiel about whatever it is you're talking about, they're not getting to see your face, right? They just see like a word or a sentence on the PowerPoint, and it is not as engaging. It is not as dynamic.
I will say the only difference is if you're doing a workshop, adults really like PowerPoints because they like to have seen, oh, I've gathered content that I can then take away and use like for my place.
But there needs to be content on the PowerPoint.
Yes.
If there's not much content on the slide, then it's not as useful.
Yeah.
And the one thing we do with kids is we do put the stories in PowerPoint. And so when they're reading picture books, this is the one flip.
Yes.
We've talked about don't use PowerPoint, but where I would use PowerPoint, where I use it all the time, is I turn all of my picture books into a PowerPoint and I make the slide transition a page turn. So it actually looks like you're reading the book. And when you're reading the story, that's the opposite. They actually want to see the pictures and the words on the page, and they don't want to see your face.
Yes.
And when you're trying to do it holding up your book like over your shoulder, they can't actually see the book well enough to engage with the content. So I love using PowerPoint when I'm reading the children's book, and I love actually holding it on certain pages for a little bit longer, asking them to find something, asking them to look for something. You can create really good engagement when you're doing a picture book reading that way. But when it's not a picture book reading, it's like gone. It's gone. And it would only come up if there was like contact information or a particular page I wanted to show them in the book.
But speaking about technology, the FOLD virtual programming is on a platform called vFairs, and it is a very dynamic, very engaging virtual platform. And so when we're talking about having these events or like panels or story times or whatever on Zoom, it's not actually on Zoom, right? When you're logging in as the audience, you don't just turn on your Zoom. You log into this platform, which is very innovative and very dynamic. And maybe you guys can talk about some of the special features from our virtual platform.
Yeah, so one thing to know is that FOLD and the Adult Festival and the Kids Festival are actually, it's pretty much similar in the setup, but they use different features, right? So the chat function within the platform doesn't really exist for the kids platform for safety reasons and a whole host of other things, but we don't have round tables. We don't have that same level of engagement. The focus for the kids side is actually resources. So you have the auditorium. It exists for both festivals where people can tune in to live events and pre-record events that have been live, but you can now watch on replay. And then on the kids side, you have the library, which is our big resource page, where people can get like activities. So some authors will have post-event activities that you can find there, or there might be supplemental activities related to the book. Coloring pages. But supplemental things like teacher guides. So some books will have teacher guides, and I know one book had like a how to draw this particular character from the book video as well. So that's like a great resource. Even the exhibitor halls are kind of different as well.
Well, I think in the kids one too, there's the scavenger hunt. So there's ways that the kids can engage with the platform and be moving around. We call it the clubhouse for FOLD kids.
And what does the scavenger hunt entail?
So scavenger hunt is there's like 12 different
No,
16.
like 25.
I don't know. There's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of objects, and they're little illustrations, and they're hidden throughout the platform, but they're hidden one at a time. So once you find the other one, you go back to the scavenger hunt, and it'll give you like clues for where to find the other ones. So teachers can use that as incentives in the classroom, and some people just like to find everything for themselves, and they don't even let their students find the scavenger hunt items. But yeah, so that's something that's unique in the kids platform. For the Big Fold, we actually have an app that we use, and that allows parents. I know I used to watch events for Fold while Eden was at basketball practice, and so the app really allows you to engage anywhere in the virtual platform from your own phone and from like the app as opposed to a browser. And that's really helpful and convenient, I think, for watching events. Watching events on demand was so much easier once the mobile app exists. So people download the VFairs app and then they just log in with their festival credentials.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about the benefits and drawbacks of the virtual events and how to add that little extra to it, I think our platform is a huge part of that, because it's not just turning on your Zoom at a specific time. It is an actual like environment where you can interact with different things, and it's very cool.
Well, and I'll share this just to wrap up. When we did our first teen events before Ardo was even with us, we did a panel conversation and a spoken word event. I'll never forget. And I remember the kids coming in for the panel conversation and being like, there were some kids that were like the little me's, like they were so excited and so keen about the authors. Some kids who were like, nah, this doesn't really, like, I'm not really keen on these book things, whatever. And they went away for lunch. They came back. They went to the spoken word event. And as the spoken word event was happening, those kids who have been kind of like indifferent about the books were so engaged. And it was the combination for me of having them see the different ways stories are told. And I think that we have I would say we have mastered, but a lot of us have figured out how to make those really valuable in-person experiences happen, how to make those like, now you can see when you put those two things together what a literary festival can do. And I think what we've tried to do with the platform, with the clubhouse, with the amazing resources that Ardo's put together is to create that kind of value and experience in a virtual space as well. We didn't come to those events with resources for teachers, with links that they could go to find more information. It's not something you can do very easily at an in-person event. QR codes on the wall, like the virtual space allows someone to log in and just get all kinds of information in one place, whether it's from individual exhibitors or it's from the library and from the resources that we've put together. And so really curating and building and developing a festival around those two things and saying both of these things are really important, I think is like the best part of the work we do.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You know what else is really, really cool about the work we do? We get to put together merch.
Well, this is our way of wrapping up today's episode. We talked to you a little bit at the front end about our merch, and we'll say it again. We have got amazing new merch as part of a fundraiser for Fold. We're really excited to offer it. There will be new things coming all the time as well. We have things in the hopper that aren't even in the store yet because we just think there's too much. There's too much good stuff on there.
We have to partial out the too much good stuff at one time is no.
We're going to eke it out. So Ardo is wearing the Fold Varsity logo, as is Lin, which is our like varsity line. I'm wearing the Read line. And you can go to our YouTube page if you're listening to this on the podcast and see what that's all about. And you can also go to thefoldcanada.org, click shop in the right corner and see all the amazing stuff we have. We are so excited for people to show up at Fold this year in Fold merch. I just think that's great. So
it's going to be amazing.
It's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. Anything else? Anything else you want to say before we wrap this up?
I would like to say to authors in particular, because a lot of events, virtual events, are recorded for people to watch again and again after the fact. So something to think about is you got to treat it like it's like a Dora the Explorer situation. Yeah. You pose a question, you leave a few seconds for an invisible answer to arrive, and then you keep it pushing. Yeah. Or you maybe while you're waiting for this invisible question, you offer your own answer. Yeah. Just because for the person watching it, it doesn't feel like they necessarily missed out on like a live experience that only the live people could enjoy. So that's one. And the other, activities. Leave people doing an activity at the end of the event so that you're extending your event to beyond like the 45 minutes or 30 minutes that you're doing it.
Oh, I'm going to share one. Dorothy Allen Palmer did an amazing event. Her book was about scooters. And she read her story. Then she had the kids imagine what their like perfect scooter would look like. And then as her takeaway activity, it was go and draw that. So the initial activity was just imagination. And the second part was to go and draw it. And I was like, just a very well orchestrated kids event.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
we haven't asked you about your top shelf, the 3 books that you would recommend. You have already given us the 3 books that you recommend in the last episode you were in, which was kids' books. Do you have 3 adult books, perhaps, that you'd like to recommend?
Of course. I love reading kids' books, so I also love reading adult books. So my 3 are River Mama by Zalika Reed Benta. It's set in Toronto, involves a Jamaican river deity who forces these 3 diaspora Jamaican kids from Toronto to go on a quest to find her comb. Excellent book. Empire of Wild by Cherie Demeline is probably one of my favorite books.
Favorite book cover of all time.
So good, about the Métis Rougarou, I believe, which is like a werewolf-like creature. Highly recommend that. And then finally, Babel by R.F. Kuang, the only non-Canadian on this list. Babel's fantastic, speculative, historical fiction. It's so good. It talks about the literal power of language, as well as real historical things that happen, but in a fictional world. So magic. Very good.
Amazing.
All right. I'm going to wrap things up by saying if you are enjoying the podcast, if you like it, leave a good comment, leave a good review. If you don't like it, just keep it to yourself. If you want to donate, you can go to thefoldcanada.org/donate. The Festival of Literary Diversity, as we've talked about it today, is a multimodal festival that will run April 27th to May 4th. You can join the festival from anywhere in the world on our virtual experience, April 27th to April 30th. And our in-person events will be held in Brampton, May 1st to the 4th. You're hearing this probably in the month of March, and our schedule and the authors are already being revealed. So you can go to our social media accounts and see who's coming. You can also keep an eye out for registration to open when the first glance at our amazing 10th anniversary schedule will become available.
Registration opens March 19th, 2025.
Yep.
If you're listening after March 19th, you should go and grab your tickets right now.
So we will see you next time on Into the Fold with Jael and Lin.